Good morning. I'm Paul Markle, Executive Director of the Barrie Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank you for joining the Barrie Chamber today for this session on team check-ins, a proactive approach to workplace well-being. 2020 was most likely the most stressful year that most of us have ever experienced. And for many of us, it's raised an awareness of how critical mental well-being is for our teams to thrive and persevere. With this in mind, we've secured experts to help us understand how to do team check-ins, how to recognize signs of distress in your staff, what you can ask and what you can't ask, how to address issues, and why taking a proactive approach can help your business. So I'm going to introduce our experts in a moment, and after the presentations, we're going to go directly to a Q&A session. So at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A and a chat. Use the Q&A for your questions, please. If there's anything that you want to talk about, process-wise, use the chat, that's fine, but I'm only going to look at the Q&A for questions. Anything that's a question coming from Facebook Live, hopefully our wonderful staff will pop those into the Q&A for us, because I won't be flipping back and forth into Facebook Live. It's just impossible to do that at the same time as run the webinar. So again, we're looking for some interaction here, right? Let us know. Don't be afraid about your whatever your misconceptions are about mental health and how you're viewed. If you've got a question, ask the question. Otherwise, you're just going to hear me rambling on for an hour, asking questions that aren't relevant of our experts. So no one wants to listen to me. They want to listen to them. So please get the questions out. So our experts today are Debbie Mulder from Inside Mental Health. Debbie is a registered psychotherapist, speaker, mental health advocate in Simcoe County, and she owns and operates Inside Mental Health, which offers mental health training and speaking engagements, and also does HR and organizational consultations. Probably busy as hell right now, which is great. Michelle Donaldson is from Lakely Human Resources and Controller Services. Michelle is a human resources consultant and co-owner of Lakely Human Resources and Controller Services. She offers a virtual HR department for small and medium-sized businesses that may not require full-time HR leadership or perhaps can't afford it just yet. Super interesting business model. For those of you that run a small business, having that kind of a consolidated team that can look at your finances and your people at the same time is invaluable. So a great thing to look at. So with that, I'm going to step out and close my yap and let these guys get to it. So Michelle's going to kick us off. I'm going to just mute myself and
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much to everyone for being here and to the Chamber for having me. In a time where there are so many topics front and center, I'm happy this one has the spotlight today. The past year has been unbelievably difficult, to say it extremely lightly, causing an unprecedented amount of stress on everyone. Even before the pandemic, mental illnesses were the #1 cause of short-term and long-term disability in Canada. It costs employers $6 billion every year due to absenteeism, presenteeism, and turnover, which means having a proactive mental health plan is essential to avoid these costs and make sure you have a strong, healthy team. The stigma around mental health continues to be the biggest hurdle I've found to managing mental health in the workplace. Employees are nervous about coming forward for fear of being judged or their job being at risk. Having a plan in place not only provides information for your employees to benefit from, like free resources and guides to help them, but it also shows them you care about their mental well-being and are there to support them. On the other side of that, we can sometimes see that something is off about one of our team members, whether they have a short fuse and are snapping at people or their productivity decreases noticeably. You have to be careful about how to handle these situations. As employers, we can't ask what is going on or what the diagnosis is. However, we can ask them and their healthcare provider about how we can help and what accommodations we can provide so that we are able to help them continue to work if possible. And remember, something I've been seeing a lot right now, so I wanted to put this in. Even though this is far easier said than done, if you're a business owner or a manager, take care of yourself. If a team member is struggling, the solution isn't to take it all on yourself. You burning out isn't what your company needs. Find tools and coping strategies that will help you get through this. I'm really excited to find out what your questions are, what you're dealing with, and how I can help.
And with that, Michelle, you said a lot of really, really good points. So as a registered psychotherapist and a speaker and a mental health advocate, I help people identify the stigma surrounding mental health that has most likely prevented them from reaching out for support. So I work with organizations to encourage conversations to end the stigma surrounding mental illness. So it's an important topic since 1 in 5 Canadians will suffer from mental illness at some point in their lifetime. With those stats, chances are pretty good that mental illness affects someone in your workplace. So with the stigma surrounding mental illness, employees who are struggling may be reluctant to come forward. And as a result, mental health concerns often go unrecognized and unaddressed, and they lead to bigger problems for the organization and the employee. If 1 in 5 Canadians are suffering from a mental illness, 2 out of those 5 people suffer in silence. So, they fear that judgment and the rejection, and being open to a conversation is the first step towards eliminating the stigma. And knowing these facts, being kind, being a good listener and a friend, be a part of this conversation to eliminate the stigma once and for all. And I always compare it to a ship, like your organization is a ship. And the staff and the employees are the fuel. And if you are not taking care of your employees, you're not taking care of the fuel that keeps your ship running, your ship isn't going to run as it should be. So it's really important to recognize the signs and the symptoms of mental health and things that are going on in your organization with your employees and being proactive about it.
You're still on mute, Paul.
Sorry, I clicked it a couple times. I did check again. Sorry, that ended quicker than I thought. So, so I got a couple questions up here. We'll hopefully there'll be some more rolling in as we go. Both of what you guys mentioned is really important. I think for experienced managers, you start to get a second sense as to what happens within your office space. At least semi-intuitive managers do. There's different kinds of personality types that don't recognize when their people are struggling. And I think that for a lot of business owners, that when they're A-type and really focused and driven, that sometimes those signals, it's not like red light, green light. It's not obvious what to do in these situations, which a lot of business owners will kind of react to. They don't see the obvious thing, right? Everything's an iceberg. 20% is obvious, everyone's happy, smiling, and 80% is beneath the surface, bubbling and brewing, and it's going to rip your hull out. So how do managers that are, really focused on that, what kind of education can they get for themselves to be better managers in terms of mental health?
Well,
you take that.
Okay. Well, I really think in just educating yourself in mental health in general, right? So knowing those signs and symptoms. So for example, would they be able to recognize that their employee is really struggling with their mental health? So, some of the signs that I really ask managers and top leadership to really recognize are, have you noticed a change in work habits in one of your employees? So, sometimes we say work habits are just chalked up to performance problems. When the root cause could actually be a mental health concern. So their lack of motivation, difficulty concentrating, or lower than normal productivity isn't necessarily a performance management issue. It could also be a mental health issue. So not jumping to conclusions there. Also changes in physical appearance. Right, so personal grooming and general appearance, is it slipping? Are you noticing differences there? If your employee actually typically arrives for work, they're typically immaculately groomed, and all of a sudden you notice that they are violating their dress code policy, or they look unkept and they're like holy shirts. It could be an indication that there's more difficulty there. Changes in their demeanor, dramatic changes in their personality, or demeanor can indicate mental health struggles. So they're exhibiting nervousness, restlessness, irritability, passiveness, worried, they're tense, or they're acting in an unusual way. That's something to be on the lookout for. Another indicator that is really obvious is being absent from work a lot or being tardy. When an employee who's usually on time for work, they start showing up late, or they're missing meetings or calling in sick, it could be a sign of a mental health disorder. And it's not about coming right out and asking your employee and saying, hey, there are mental health issues happening, because we can't do that. You can't do that. But being proactive, when it comes to helping your team with mental health issues, it doesn't mean that you need to spend a lot of money doing it. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a huge dramatic thing, where we can actually, for ourselves as managers, be that example. It means that, we are taking our breaks. We are taking our vacations. We are eating right. And we are showing that and setting that example for the employees. So those are just little things to look out for. But the things that we do and how we show it really would set an example for our employees.
Yeah. And I would say when we're dealing with the pandemic and a lot of us working from home, I've heard a lot that people are now, the cameras aren't being turned on. They're having these meetings and it's just blacked out. I would reinstate that you want cameras on so that you can have those kind of face-to-face conversations, because that's lacking, and it is pulling from employee engagement. And in the most simplest terms, I think a lot of us are guilty of saying, how are you? How was your weekend? How are you? Did you get that report then? There's always this follow-up to how are you? But when you have the opportunity to have a one-on-one with one of your team members that you may feel is in a tougher spot, just sit down with them and say, how are you? And see what the response is. I've definitely found that that's, it sometimes put people on the spot, but you're a little bit more likely to get something from them rather than saying something like, how are you? I've noticed such and such over the past little while. Just sit down and have a conversation and check in with them without kind of setting them up for their response.
Yeah, it's funny when I managed larger teams. I had a background with McDonald's for many years, so a normal staff would be anywhere from 100 to 120, 140 direct reports, and they're all in shifts and different things. So you wouldn't see some kids for weeks or certain employees because you just were on day side and they were on the evenings and you wouldn't see them. So we had sort of formalized check-ins, where we would do one-on-ones with people, more performance related, and make sure that your policies and procedures were working, but they were also just to check in and see how people were doing and get a feel for how the restaurant was running. It's a real team environment. I find with smaller groups, sometimes that's more difficult when you work with people day in and day out. Some of their quirks and things that you, and I'm talking about people working with me and my quirks, obviously, right? Those things become really apparent, so it becomes kind of wallpaper. It's not so much out of the norm for somebody to be quiet, but again, having a conversation with people in those smaller environments sometimes is a lot more difficult. And having formalized check-ins is more difficult because it's immediately apparent to somebody else that you're sitting down with somebody. So I think standardizing policies and doing the same things is really important because it doesn't center people out when you bring them into your office, right? I noticed little ponytails bobbing around in the back of Debbie there, which is hilarious. So
yeah.
That's great.
That's the joys of working from home.
Yeah, well, it's all good, but even something like that adds stress to people, right? How am I going to be viewed because there's a little head bobbing around? It's life, I think this normalizes a lot of those things, and I think this could be a really good thing for mental health awareness because this is an epidemic or an event that's impacting everybody, and you can really see how different people react to that kind of thing. So anyways, we got a bunch of questions. I'm going to get to the questions a little bit, let that drive kind of the discussion a little bit.
Okay.
I'm going to go down and ask this one
Paul,
first, and then.
Can we just get back? You were
Yep.
talking about when you have big teams, so being able to sit down one-on-one is really difficult. I have worked in a large organization, and something that has been helpful is, which isn't always appreciated, but some of their team members have recognized it and they bring it to us. Do you know what I mean? So kind of putting these plans in place, letting them know that the organization is supportive of mental health and they want to help staff, and all of those kinds of things can kind of help their team members be able to recognize it and bring it forward. There's not a lot you can do with that information, but at least you know who you should be reaching out to. And when it comes to people feeling like, as an HR person, nobody wants to come to my office. I know that. Like if they get pulled into HR, it's really scary. I have set up meetings back in the day when we could at a Tim Hortons. I have set up meetings off-site so that we can have those conversations where it's not so tense and people aren't like, oh gosh, people are watching me walk into this office. But it's about getting creative to have those conversations if you're aware or something's been identified to you that you should be figuring out.
But I also think, sometimes that's not available. So normalizing the office conversation is important, that everybody understands that good things and bad things happen in that office, and then it doesn't become something that's out of the norm, right? Again, and from my experience being tactical, I mean, I would use that, not as a manipulative thing, but I knew that it was going to have an impact if I pulled somebody in. And I may not be giving them crap. I just wanted it to sound like or see like that. I mean, being tactical with people's mental health is really important as well. Sometimes it may be a really touchy subject and people just want to see that you're addressing it. You may not be actually addressing it in that conversation, but other people in the staff think you are, and then you still accomplish the same thing, right? And calm nerves, right? It's a very good point how other people will come after it. So anyways, as a small business owner, I'm sorry, I'm looking over my camera here. I find it very difficult to run my business or remote teaching. My kid is just not able to work for us, so it's not happening. My staff is only completing most of their job roles because of remote learning as well. How do I ask them to take a leave of absence so that I can get a team that will work, apologize, so I can work the way that I need to in the meantime? Sorry, my screen is literally full to the point where I can't move it. It's a good point. I mean, that impacts your mental health and the way that your office runs, and you got to make these hard decisions as a manager. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think there's a process to that first. I don't think you can just call and say, do you think you could take a leave? I think there's a process that needs to be put in place where you try to work through this. The word of the year is flexibility when it comes to employment relationships. So depending on what your business is like, and I know that if you're customer facing, there's certain hours you need to be available for, and it gets very difficult to be too flexible with the hours. But if you can, like I for myself know I'm trying to homeschool JK, so she actually needs a lot of attention while she does that. So my work hours are in between Google Classroom calls and into the evening right now, which isn't ideal. It's in fact stressful because there's really no downtime right now, but I've been lucky enough to be able to figure that out. So to kind of try to come up with creative solutions so that you are getting the productivity you need from your employees without having to go that route, but then to just have an honest conversation about, is this possible right now? Or will it help you feel less stressed to kind of just take a leave right now? So it's not a telling, it's a let's discuss this option. And then it's okay to say, well, then I need this from you, and to set the expectations with your employees about what you need and go from there.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say that I definitely agree with that, Michelle. As long as your staff know that you are approachable and that they can come to you and be able to express that, and that it's a safe place, I think open up that conversation a lot easier, that you can what you're expecting and that they'll be able to work with you and make that happen.
The other thing too is that I think a lot of the stress that you feel as a manager when you're dealing with these, in answer to that particular question, sometimes just getting a lid off the can is the important part of it. Don't procrastinate on those kinds of discussions, those hard discussions. Just be direct, be honest. People understand that you're in that position as well, and tell them that you're feeling kind of, listen, I'd hate to have this conversation with you, but let's talk about it. Maybe there's a solution that we can get around. Making assumptions in your own head as to what they're assuming, I don't think that helps anybody. We've had to do it internally within the office here. You're balancing relationships and priorities, And sometimes the priority oversteps, and as long as you restore that balance later on, you're okay. But you got to have that conversation. You can't let it go, right?
Right.
It's too important to not have it.
Right.
All right, so let's keep going here. How do I ask my team how they're doing without seeming like I'm prying? Is there some kind of documentation we can both sign off that will let them know mental health issues won't impact their job security?
I think that's where having the plan in place, I wouldn't, the Mental Health Commission of Canada has put out a full standard. It's not legislated, but they've put it out to be a resource for Canadian employers. And it comes with an implementation guide as well. The standard alone is 75 pages, so it can feel a little daunting. But it does have some really great information in it. And I think if you put that in place, send it around to your employees to let them know that this is what we're doing. I want you to feel supportive. Please come and talk to me if you've got anything going on. To sit down and say, here's a document, I think would be a little over the top, off the hop with this conversation. So just putting a program in place, or even, you know what, if you're a small business, just send an email saying, I know there's a lot going on right now. I feel it. I know you feel it. Like, if there's anything you want to talk through or you need some support, I'm here. Like, we're all in this.
Yeah.
Let's just put it on the table.
Well, and that's being proactive too, right? Not just waiting for something to happen and then taking action. It's actually taking action right now, and definitely talking to your staff and seeing if they have any ideas of, okay, so you know what? We can't hide it. We're all under some sort of stress. We're all dealing with something. So what is something we can do as a team to help de-stress, right? Do we need to have, a yoga training over Zoom, or something like that, where you're just taking the initiative and not just waiting for something to happen. It's like, oh, wow, my employer really understands mental health, and we got this training going on, and I know I can go to them for support. So, yeah.
And again, even in a document like that, an email that goes out, here's 4 ways you can contact me without anybody knowing, and everything we discuss is going to be confidential.
Yes.
There's always that hesitancy, that something you say is going to get shared out. And I think you got to walk the talk. If you have no intention of keeping something private, don't have the conversation as a manager, right?
Right.
Like if you're Irish and you have no ability to keep a secret, you really shouldn't be managing people in any way, shape, or form, right?
My HR hat says you shouldn't say things like that.
I know. I apologize.
I know, you're just joking. But that really comes down to that trusting relationship between employees and employers. And I know when you have a small team, it is so easy for everybody to know everything that's going on. And there is that concern, like, oh my gosh, if I tell him we're hurt, I feel like something's going to come out, and I'm just going to keep it to myself. So you have to make sure that those boundaries are there, where everybody knows about each other's personal life, because you're coming in, it's a small office and everyone's talking about everything. But there needs to be that moment where certain conversations have been kept so that you build that relationship, so people are comfortable sharing.
Right.
Yeah. I had somebody always tell me that trust equals respect, right? Once people trust you, they respect you. Yep. And then once you have respect, it's just that whole rolling thing, right? And you need to develop that trust with people. And I think that's important in every sense of a relationship, right? Whether it's work or at home kind of thing. Yep. So, and then read through a couple here. So should I have a documented plan for my team members that have mental health concerns, like an opt-in voluntary disclosure? What would such a plan include? Am I opening my business up to risk? I don't know. I don't know. It's one of those things where let's say in your staff has a diagnosed mental health issue, right? Let's say they have a concern that they're aware of. Sometimes it changes their behavior. That's not something that you can ask people to disclose. They have to do that voluntarily, and then you're back into that trust and respect thing. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there will always be people who announce it. Like, I have the luxury of being in HR, so I kind of automatically have this ability for people to trust me, because they understand that confidentiality is like the number one point of my job. Yeah. So I have had the luxury of people coming to me saying, I have anxiety. This is what I take for it. this is when I take it, this is what I need to do when that happens, and or whatever that is. So that's a lot easier to manage. But when you have someone who clearly something's going on with, you can't ask, you can't, so you just, and what I've done is just put it out there to the whole company, like, we're supportive if there's anything you need on all of those things, because there's those two sides, and it's really difficult to manage both, but easier when you know what's going on. And the risk part, the higher risk is ignoring it, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, Debbie, but
Yeah, I mean, that definitely would be the higher risk. It's just not doing anything about it. And to that point though, there's some people that might actually know that there's something wrong, not sure exactly what it is. And so that's probably why they're not able to say anything about it. Or even the stigma around mental health is, I'm not talking about this because I don't want people to think that I am a certain way, a certain person. Like, I'm a normal person. I have anxiety in my life. I deal with anxiety. And so that stops people from actually coming out and talking about it. So it's honestly education, education, education. If you can get somebody to come in and do some sort of workshop, some training, some webinar, something that the staff can be involved in to learn more about it, and means, okay, these are the signs and symptoms. This is probably what I'm dealing with, and this is how I get support for it. These are some resources here. And so that you know that your staff is being trained in this. And if they are dealing with it, here are the resources. You're not coming right out and saying, I've noticed this in you. I'm just offering up to everybody. These are some resources that you guys can take part and take advantage of and use. And just to know that, you know what, I'm here to support you, but I'm not going to come out and ask you, but here are some resources. And here are some things that we're doing in our organization to help and support you if you need it. So opening it up for everybody so nobody feels singled out.
Yeah, it's a real Pandora's box. I mean, that old rule of the discipline in private, praise in public. You know, if you do a team recognition, sometimes that's more harm than good, because people that haven't pulled their weight are recognized in the same way. Yeah. But this is different. This is where you may recognize and you turn yourself into, you know, Dr. Spock or whatever. But I mean, trying to pre-diagnose your team, I think this is what's going on. So you put some literature up saying, hey, recognize these signs if you're having them. I think you need to have that as a common practice all the time. So when things go up, it doesn't seem out of the ordinary, like you're censoring somebody's behavior out.
Right.
But, you know, again, that direct approach, listen, I noticed that you're a little off. Not sure what's going on. Just want to let you know my door's always open, and then leave it at that. Yeah. You know, those kinds of things in a smaller group, I think, are really, really important from a check-in standpoint. Sometimes you can't do anything more than that. You just, you know, sometimes you just gotta listen, which is one of those things, right? I have daughters that have anxiety, you know, and I'm able to say that because they're right out in public with the fact that they've got anxiety. You know, my eldest in particular. So I've lived with it and watched it, and you know, it's one of those things. But there's a lot of people out there that don't have that kind of experience with people that are suffering from those kinds of things, and it's hard to get your head around behavior in some ways. I could never be a psychotherapist. I've in some cases too much empathy, I think, but it's certainly a lot more prevalent, and I think normalizing those conversations everywhere, things like Let's Talk, Bell, Let's Talk, those kind of things, and getting your company behind those kinds of initiatives, I think, is one way of sort of stepping lightly into that whole realm, right? Because you're doing it in a way that normalizes it, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, going through. So how do you suggest finding out what staff feel they need? We have a lot of team Zoom calls, and find individual check-ins difficult. As you mentioned, people are not forthcoming. Would you suggest anonymous pulse surveys?
Yes.
Interesting concept.
Yeah. I think that's a good start to the conversation. Doing the anonymous pulse survey will give you some information, and then you can come back and have meetings where you can literally pull things from that survey to say, this is how someone's been feeling. These are what we actually, like, you may have things in place that they're just not aware of, right? So you can actually say, this is what was identified. I want you to know that we do have this in place, or this is identified. Really great idea. We're going to work on that for this time this year, or however that works. Right. And the other good thing about a pulse survey is you can track yourself year over year and see how you're doing, how your employees are feeling. Are they engaged? Are there things that they want to see changing and things like that? So yeah, I would always start with an employee survey if you think no one's really feeling too comfortable to just bring it all forward to you.
And anonymous, that's a huge thing too.
Anonymous is huge.
Yeah. You'll get a lot of response as long as they know that you don't know that it's me. I will give out what I need and what I'm looking for. And as long as you're listening to that and implementing it, you'll get more and more responses.
That is a very good point. If you collect their thoughts and ideas and do nothing with it, that does more harm than good.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I worked in an organization that did that. You know, every 6 months we did an employee survey, and it was the same questions. Yeah, you know, survey over survey. There was very little change on them, even in the verbiage. And you can create a baseline and then see where you went, because I mean, as you're adding staff or taking stuff out, you know, sometimes a staff change will change a whole dynamic, and you can benchmark that, which is kind of cool. You know, when we did this particular program, it had this impact on the next set of results, and you can really see whether the things you're doing are making an impact. And then paying attention, obviously, to the comments that came in. You know, we would follow them up with focus groups. And the focus groups I always found kind of funny, because I don't know. I don't think you can keep confidentiality when you do those kinds of focus groups, because you can control what you look after and keep confidential, but you can't control what other people may have heard and then choose to spin out outside of it. So they can be really dangerous. But the survey itself, I think, is a great idea. All right. This is another one about temporary leave. We've talked about that a bit. So I'm an employee with a mental health issue that I'm managing for the majority of my adulthood. It worries me to come forward with my employer to tell them about my mental health issue in fear of judgment in not getting promoted into higher roles. So, yeah, I mean, in the context of what we're discussing, I mean, that's kind of a specific thing about an individual. I think, you know, recognizing that people have those fears may be something that you need to take a look at. It's hard to say how somebody's going to react to that in any given environment. I would hope that, you know, that doesn't become a part of a concern, but that's not to say that doesn't happen, obviously. So probably a valid fear, to be honest with you. I guess as a business owner, you got to be aware that those things happen, and you set programming up to make sure that you disperse as many of those fears as possible, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not really sure how to answer that one.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, Michelle, from an HR standpoint, and just, I mean, as a whole, are they allowed to discriminate based on mental health issues?
No.
Exactly. Right. So like, the person knows that it's illegal to do that. You can't do that, so that they know that their rights in this issue.
Absolutely.
I just want to put that out and say, no, you cannot do that.
Yeah. But to me, if you're an adult and you've gotten this taken care of, you have control over it, I think you just kind of carry on with life. However, if it's something that you need appointments for, like I've worked with people who they've needed to go to a psychologist and their psychiatrist during every week. Like they had appointments every week. So they just kind of said, like, this is what's going on. And you manage that, whether they be at the beginning of your day, the end of the day, if you can. I know those appointments can feel impossible to get in the first place, let alone make them work for your work day. Yeah. So in that situation, I know people have come forward just saying, like, this is what needs to happen. What's the plan to make sure I get all my work covered off? That's what I would suggest doing, is like, this is what I need. I still want to get my work done. How do you see this being the best way to go forward? But really, if you've got it under control, that's amazing. I've worked with people with bipolar disorder and things like that, and we know there's manic phases and all of those kinds of things, and it'd be really hard for them, hard for the employer to manage, but you work through that. But to bring it to your employer, again, it comes from the employer putting it out there, creating that trusting relationship, making everyone feel comfortable to bring that information forward. And if you're working somewhere where you're not comfortable doing that, you do have the law on your side that you cannot be discriminated against.
Right. Yeah, good point. So this next one is I'm noticing employees who are at all different stages of handling the pandemic. I'm going to see a lot of this pandemic stuff. What's the best way to approach this? I've noticed that it's been a roller coaster of emotions, denial, grief, stress, optimism, etc. Should I be concerned about extreme optimism in addition to the obvious extreme negative emotions? What are some ways to know if it's just a bad day or becoming a mental health issue? I always use that kind of a 24-hour cooling off rule kind of thing before applying any kind of counseling or discipline in a management role. Everybody has bad days, let everybody cool off, cool air prevail. And to me, that's how I would approach that kind of a thing. If somebody's just having a weird day,
Right.
Maybe they get sent out to get coffee more often that day to give them a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, you kind of create an environment to give them an opportunity to blow off some steam and not necessarily attack the symptoms in the moment, because you're putting somebody's back into a corner, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know, am I on the right track?
You absolutely are. And I think with mental health issues, it's not something that it happens once and it's like, whoa, I have anxiety. This is stuff that you follow through for a few weeks to say, okay, this has been going on for a little bit. I recognize something is happening here. This is not just going away. It's not just a bad day. And I need to get support for it. So if you are noticing this in an employee and it's ongoing for a number of weeks, then I would be like, okay, something is happening here. And let me just reach out and just say, I'm here if you need me. And I've just noticed this, but it's not something that you jump on right away, because you're right, it could be just a bad day. But if you're noticing it's going on for a number of weeks, that's when you would take some action and just help and support the employee.
Right.
Yeah.
So we do these things all the time, and then a lot of this leads down to that you need to get some professional help and maybe working within your business to help out. Cost always becomes a part of that conversation. I want to bring a consultant online because I can't handle this on my own. I don't have the skill sets. Cost is relative to output in a lot of cases, right? What's the cost of not spending some money and getting some help in your staffing situation? So what are some ways that people can engage with professionals such as yourselves to get that kind of help? Are there ways of kind of easing a company into it? Do you charge a la carte, for lack of a better expression? Or is it better to take a look at an overall program and span that out over the course of a year? So what are some ways that people can engage with consulting services in a meaningful way that don't maybe have a lot of resources, especially these days?
Well, first, I would definitely encourage businesses to put and allocate money towards training. So that training doesn't necessarily mean about the job. Training could be mental health issues, HR issues, right? Like that, your training dollars that you're putting towards really enhancing your organization, because it's not just about what you do as the organization, but it's about the mental health and well-being and understanding human resources issues as well. So putting aside money for training and designating that for any kind of training that your staff needs, I think that is definitely important. And as far as mental health goes, you can have, a session or a workshop on mental health and have it one and done, but these issues don't go away. I really do believe in doing upkeep and doing regular trainings around mental health, identifying what it is, knowing the different signs and symptoms and the different mental health issues, and really investing money into training and helping your employees, upper management, learn more about that. So not necessarily like a one and done, but really investing in ongoing support for your employees and for yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would also say, if there's a situation that you as the manager or employer is so uncomfortable dealing with that you'd rather not, that's not the answer. That's going to end up costing you a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So if there's situations like that, you do want to pull a consultant in that can either coach you as the manager through that situation, or even if it's the first time or something like that, work through it with you so that you can kind of see how that works, that it's not as scary as it may seem off the hop, because it's uncomfortable, right? And I know when you're a business owner or manager and you've started this passion project, you didn't really think about this side of things.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be an expectation that you should be perfect at this, but just know that there are people out there that can help you, can support you, and use them, because financially it will cost you more in the future if you don't deal with it now.
And I love that you're
Yeah.
using that business term, right? Business, that people understand that you don't want it to cost you more. So let's take care of it now.
Yeah.
Waiting till it turns into a bigger issue.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I mean, I love the E-Myth books. You know, I think it's important that if your passion is learning how to put a perfect sear on a scallop, that doesn't prepare you for dealing with staff and all those other things.
Absolutely.
And recognize your limitations.
Right.
A scallop just tastes good. It's not gonna. But I mean, if you screw it up, you throw it out, you start with a new one. But if you screw up mental health or an HR issue, it could cost you thousands in legal.
Exactly.
You know, legal costs and all those other things, right? So keep that in mind. Stay in your lane. Do what you do well, and let others help you with what you don't. And if you're not prepared for those costs, you know, you need to seriously think about, you know, why you're in business and how you're going to continue to move forward.
That's right.
Sorry, I don't mean that to throw anybody under the bus, but these are the kinds of things that you don't mess around with, really, when you get down to it.
Right.
So, sorry, go ahead.
There was one thing I wanted to touch on. We've talked a lot about, you know, performance being affected by mental health, and that's absolutely true. But if there's a performance issue and someone's not really being forthcoming about what they're struggling with or things, you still need to manage that performance piece.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So don't just let things go to the wayside because you're like, I think there's something going on there and I don't know what it is. I'm just gonna see what comes. Don't do that because you need to remember how that situation is going to affect you, affect the rest of your team, and affect this person. Because if you're not highlighting what the expectations are, that things aren't really going well right now, that's not fair to them either. Right. So you still need to manage that. And maybe through those conversations, something will come out. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, what if they tell me something? That will make your job easier.
Yes.
Don't be scared to hear something like that.
Yes.
If there is something going on, that means you identified it and can help them and help them work through it. So don't leave a performance management issue alone. It needs to be dealt with because the team members are like, why are they just like, why am I pulling their weight? Like, why aren't we dealing with this?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then it becomes,
there's this rippling effect that happens. So always deal with it, no matter if you're like, I think there's something going on there. Just still manage it the same way you would. Don't just let it sit there.
I think the important thing there is it doesn't cost anything to document what's going on. And there's a difference between documenting and discipline, right?
Absolutely.
Documenting and keeping track of what's happening, you know, it's a pattern of behavior that creates the need to have some discipline or praise. You know, a pattern could be a good pattern, right? I mean, you know, consistently outperforming. You got to use it both ways. But that documentation piece is super important, I think, in recognizing, because it allows you to go back in timeline. You know what, this is happening. Every second Friday, they got a problem, you know. Maybe it's their paycheck isn't stretched far enough, and you know that can be really helpful in trying to figure out where a problem is.
Yeah. So it in writing is really important too. Some people, you know, you have those conversations, but then you kind of walk away from it. When you kind of have it and you've read it, it tends to sink in a little bit more.
That's right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Is there a good way to proactively handle staff relationships to avoid resentment and jealousy? Run a large sales team, and from a business decision, I've had to only keep my strongest staff working during the lockdowns because I need to maximize sales. Maximize sales close. Each team member brings something to the team and is valued, but right now, to stay in business, I need sales closed. Any thoughts in integrating a team back together when I'm able to do so? Is this something we openly discuss?
This one is always tricky. Because we're always watching something else happening and we have half the story. So when team members are watching people, you know, be praised or whether or not things are happening, they don't have the full story. So they go to their own conclusions, jealousy happens, and there's conflict. So it's always difficult to manage. If you can be as transparent as possible, that's helpful. But in the end, privacy will get us too. So you need to manage both of those things. And if there is someone upset, to pull them inside and be like, I know you're upset. There are certain things I can't talk about, but these are the business decisions I had to make. Let's move forward.
Mm-hmm. And eventually everybody's coming back together.
Yes.
Eventually that's what's happening. So there are workshops, and I do work for a company that does assessments and that helps teams grow together, and with teams that are in conflict, and find out the strengths and personalities of each team member and how they can work together and really make an effective team. So investing in that kind of a workshop to help support teams when they come back together in person or face-to-face again, let's do some team building stuff to really get things going again and make sure that we're producing what we need to produce. And you guys are, you work for it here, you know your job, you know how to do it. Now let's work together. So just investing on some workshop training, team building stuff as well.
And one of the things I found with the pandemic is when people are left at home without that team feeling where you're, having those chats through the day, you kind of feel the vibe going on. Paranoia is creeping in right now. I've spoken to people who are like, I don't know if my boss is happy with me right now. And then I speak to their boss who's like, they're amazing. I think you're really going to be working with them. I'm like, you need to tell them that. Do you know what I mean?
Like, yeah.
We're kind of left to our own thoughts and just email. So you're not sure about tone and everything like that. It's really affecting people. So I would say, back to your point, Paul, the positive feedback, that's always been an issue because we're always kind of on the negative because that's what needs to be fixed. I'm going to talk to you about this and move on. Right. But even more now, people need to know that they're doing a good job and that they're appreciated, because we're all left at home not really sure how to gauge that right now.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we in the past, appreciation is one of those things that we talk about doing, a team check-in or a survey. One of the things that always came up in every one I ever did was that people didn't feel appreciated. And you saying good job openly to somebody or thank you, sometimes isn't recognized as appreciation. Manager's mind it is. I appreciate them. I say thank you, but they're not seeing it from an employee standpoint. One of the things that we did, and this is a tactic that that I thought was really, really helpful, is we had little sheets of paper that said, I appreciate you, whatever. And it was internal team recognition, where you had staff recognizing staff for doing something. I appreciate, Barney, I appreciate that you picked my shift up on Thursday. I really appreciate that happened. Or, during lunch today, it was really busy, and I appreciate you, taking up and running one side of the kitchen. Whatever, it could be anything. It could be, I appreciate your smile, anything along those lines. But it was to create this environment of appreciative behavior, and that's really what you're trying to create, I think, in your work environment. Is you can't change who somebody is, but you can hopefully impact their behaviors. And that's what you address, is the behaviors behind things, right? So I would say it doesn't matter what you do, even having something with the Zooms where if you have signs that you hold up that maybe create something where you appreciate something, somebody, whatever, every one of those meetings might help to create that kind of a better environment.
And being specific it goes a long way, right? You can just say thank you, but what are you thanking me for? Mm-hmm. But really being and saying what it is, and say, I thank you for picking up that shift for me. It goes a long way. It really does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Appreciation doesn't always have to come from managers.
No.
Nobody cares where the appreciation comes from, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. It's just people just want to feel appreciated.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nobody appreciates me. Clean the house, cook, whatever. Take stuff.
We appreciate
myself.
you.
That's what I do.
We appreciate you, Paul.
I like me.
Very appreciated.
We appreciate you, Paul.
Yeah. Anyways, it's funny how that goes. I don't know. I can give you days worth of stories on that kind of stuff. But anyways, sensitive employee that is known to cry a lot. She's a great worker, but when I approach her about anything less than joyful, she cries at things that would not necessarily be a crying situation. like to help her excel in her position, but don't know how to manage the emotions. Any suggestions on managing sensitive employees?
I mean, I wonder why it is that she is crying when she's being approached with stuff that's not necessarily, is it bad things that they're coming to her with, and that's when she starts crying, or is it anything? Or I missed that.
I don't know, I'm just reading the question.
Oh, okay, okay. Because
to be honest with you, I think somebody's talking about me. I have a tendency of crying a lot when I'm at work for no reason. Yeah. How do you help me?
Because I wonder if it is the actual work, or, you know, if it's a bigger issue, if it's the job or if it's a bigger issue, right? And that comes along with, okay, do I trust my employer enough to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm dealing with? It's not necessarily what you're saying, maybe it's how you're saying it that really triggers me, and I get upset about it. But again, that's a conversation that the employee needs to be able to have with the employer. So how approachable are you in being able to talk openly and honestly with your employees, that they can come to you and be open and honest about what's going on? Knowing how to speak to each employee is going to be different, right? Like your approach and how you speak to them, it's going to be different for everybody. And you as the employer are really going to have to learn how to approach people differently, to really be effective in how you speak with them. Michelle, I don't know if you...
No, I think that's right. I think if someone's crying over things that are even positive, like just working through something, their emotions are really right at the cusp all the time. So I think there's definitely more going on there. I've definitely worked with people who get teary for something that I wouldn't get teary over, but we need to your point, like everyone's a little bit different. So learning how to manage that and saying something like, I see that you're emotional. That was not my intent. Like, how can we work through this? Address it. Yeah. I would always address it. Yeah. But you will have people with different emotional levels and all of those kinds of things. But if they're crying really easily, I would suggest that there's something going on there, and just to say, how can I help? And as an HR person, I've always had somebody like Debbie in my back pocket, because the amount of times I've said, I'm not a professional psychologist. I don't think I should be having this conversation with you, but I always try to have a Debbie in my back pocket.
Well, the resources, the resources.
Amazing. Yeah. I would suggest calling her. I think she'd be able to help you talk this through. So even as an employer, you could have those business cards available so that when those conversations happen that you're not really comfortable having, you can say, I think we need to stop this conversation here, because I want you to speak to somebody who can help you more than I can.
Yeah. The resources are huge.
Yeah.
Because if they don't feel comfortable in saying it, and you don't really have those resources in yourself to speak about it, I know somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
You want it, here you go. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think using those external resources that are confidential is super important, because if let's say you're not having any success getting through that individual, talking to another peer or one of their peers to have them see what's going on is not a good idea, because it breaks trust and can make things a lot worse. But, you know, in some cases, you have to think that you got to look after that individual. If their behavior is harming themselves in the way that in their ability to do their own job, they're putting themselves at risk. Right. So, addressing it isn't necessarily harming them or going to be, sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and get it done, right? And have that conversation. You know, if they continue to cry through the conversation, well, they were crying anyway, so what the hell? You might as well have the conversation.
Absolutely. And to your point about peers, I had said they'll sometimes bring things forward, but that's where that conversation ends between you and the peer. You can't kind of go back and say, do things look better?
Right. Yeah. But that confidentiality is a great point to make known to them, right? This is confidential, right? It's not going to come back to me, and I'm not going to write a report about it. This is confidential.
Yeah, trying to humanize yourself, right? This is me being empathetic and a human being kind of a deal. I had a boss always talked about a worry tree, right? Everybody has a worry tree. You ever heard that concept?
Yeah.
You know,
I teach that a lot,
When you get to work, you're supposed to shed everything out of your worry tree and just focus on what's going on there. And that's crap. That doesn't happen. You know,
it's impossible.
What happened last night in an argument with your 20-year-old, it's still sitting in the back of your head, and it may impact the way you deal with another 20-year-old at work because they're, exhibiting the same kind of behavior. So I think you've got to be cognizant of everybody has stuff going on that they don't let out.
Yes.
And be aware of that when you're dealing with people. I think you find that you're going to run into a lot less conflict if you go in heads up.
Right.
Work is certainly an escape for a lot of people.
Yes.
It is.
And now that we can't leave our house.
No, but I mean, it's one of those things where I think, some of us recognize that you choose your mood.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. So when you come to work, you choose happy or choose to be quiet or whatever. It's a choice that you're making to behave the way that you are.
Yes.
And sometimes letting people just tell them that they recognize, that they may have been not how they necessarily wanted to be perceived, right? So it's important to get that sort of concept out as well. We've got 10 more questions in here, and we're not going to get to all of them. A lot of the questions in here are around the same kind of subject matter. So I apologize to anybody that we didn't get to directly. We'll do our best to answer some of these offline, but I want to give everybody a chance to kind of sum up before we close this off, being respectful of everyone's time. You guys as panelists can see the questions in there, and I know that you maybe have been reading along or maybe not. The look
but I
to me
can't.
says that you haven't been.
No.
So there's 10 questions in there, and maybe what we'll do is have you guys respond to them, after the fact. But is there anything in there that you see that you want to address right now? Let's do it in the next couple of minutes, and then we'll go from there. But as I said, a lot of these questions are very, very similar in terms of feel and how we've answered them. But I appreciate it. I think
someone put a question about what to do if they feel that they're not in an employee, if their employer isn't supportive of mental health or any of those kind of things. The government, both federal and provincial, have put out free resources, especially through COVID. So I would suggest looking those up just so that you're not kind of left alone.
Okay.
And to also reach out to somebody like Debbie if your benefits will help you with that financially, or honestly, if there's anything you can save during that month to pay for those appointments, I would always encourage it, because speaking to somebody like Debbie, you create that relationship. There's probably a face-to-face that you can have online and that kind of thing to kind of talk through what you're going through.
Yeah. Well,
there are resources out there for everybody.
Yeah, and the free resources too, like you said, Michelle.
Yeah.
They're out there. Yeah. Mental health is huge right now. So
maybe you guys could provide some of those links, and we'll put them up in the follow-up. This is going to be on YouTube, so that our viewers can actually go and find those direct resources, and we'll go from there. Obviously, you guys are both chamber members, so there's your services are available. Webinars aren't necessarily to promote your business, to promote the topic, but clearly you guys have some expertise in there, so I would encourage people to reach out if they have further questions, ones that we may not have been able to get through to today. We had a healthy audience today, which is good, and we'll actually have probably a lot of views on Facebook. So I think this was a great topic and very timely. Everybody's going through this, and again, there's going to be an announcement today for the restrictions. Every day, you're not really sure what's going to happen. The 1 p.m. Doug Fording that everybody gets, is challenging. I think the biggest thing for businesses and business owners is the lack of the ability to plan and not have confidence in what's coming up. Most business owners, entrepreneurs, even managers are used to being able to have some idea of where things are going, and not having that for most of us control freak type people, that's really tough, right? So recognize obviously your own mental health, as we talked about earlier on, and sometimes having conversations with other people helps you to self-soothe a little, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
In the end, not promoting alcoholism, there's always wine, right? There's always that way to unwind at the end of the day, a cocktail.
There's always some sort of
chat
prep
with a
you
cup
can
of
look
tea.
forward to at the end of the day.
After work hours. After work hours.
After work hours, that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nobody can see the other side where I've got a bottle of scotch, but that's okay. It's good.
Jeez, Paul.
You're honest about it. It's not hidden in your
Yes.
drawer.
I can't afford a psychotherapist, so I have Johnny Walker to help me out. Right?
Oh.
No.
Not
I'm not
how we
saying that we
work
do
here,
any of
Paul.
that kind of stuff.
I'll do it for free, Paul.
Yeah, okay, all right. So anyways, we're gonna close up. We're at 10:30 here. So in closing, thank you again for joining us and for the work that you're doing every day in your business. Whether you're open or closed, doesn't matter. It's important that you guys stay positive and continue to work through this while the curve gets flattened. Continue to shop local. We've got a few initiatives that are up and coming. We're in development right now to kind of continue that local feel within the chamber, which is kind of fun. But continue to support your families and friends with intentional purchasing choices, especially during the lockdowns. We've got a couple of events coming up. January 13th, which is actually tomorrow, based on my clock. We have chamber chat networking sessions, face-to-face connections. Again, these are, that kind of chamber chat is more about mental health. It's less about business and networking, quite frankly. It's about getting some face-to-face human contact and getting an opportunity to talk to people that don't live with you about things that are important to you, and they're meant to be kind of fun, but they do have a business purpose as well, obviously. And then on Thursday, the 14th, we actually have another webinar this week. Sorry, guys, you're old news now. We're going to get into social media marketing with TKL Media. So this kind of life, two ladies that have done some pretty amazing things, a lot of fun. And we're going to learn about important parts of social media and why online communities are the future of business. So I encourage you guys to show up for those. And having said that, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to doing it again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
And,
Thank you.
Come on over to the office at some point. I'll introduce you to my therapist.
All right. I think we've met.
Yeah, all right. All right. Talk to you
All
soon.
right. Take
Okay.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.